It's time to listen to real science, and that's that.
Vaping products, or
vaping products. Well, vaping products don't contain tobacco. Well, vaping products don't contain tobacco.
We are the vapors of Australia, and we're done with the propaganda. We're done with the lies that are spreading, and we know which way this heading. We know the government's word is dangerous because they're paying for lies from the nefarious. We rely on real science, so we know what's good for us.
Hello, and thank you for having me here today. It's an absolute privilege. So thank you to the Libertarian Movement, thank you to Ash Blackwell, thank you to David Limbrick and everybody else involved in this fantastic summit today. Can I just at the outset maybe introduce myself? Hi, I am Pippa Starr. I am the director and spokesperson of a fast-growing movement that we call ALIVE, which is an acronym for Australia Let's Improve Vaping Education, because it's quite obvious, as you'll hear me read through today, that we certainly do need some improving in vaping education in Australia right now. So, let me also state at the outset, we are not funded by any other associated or other entity other than the safer nicotine consumers of Australia. We're not associated with big tobacco. We're not shills with big tobacco. In fact, we're done with being associated. Every person who advocates for their right to remain smoke-free is often tarred with the same brush as being some big tobacco shill. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are the consumer vapors of Australia. We are the ones who have found a pathway off smoking. We refuse to be told what to do and how to remain smoke-free and to be forced back onto smoking once again, as we've seen happen sadly and too much, particularly over the last year and a half or since the beginning of 2024 with the Health Minister's rollout of bills. So let me get back on track. Look, I, like most people, unfortunately, think about somebody who's passed from a related illness to using a tobacco-related product. But as one Professor Becky Freeman, who's a well-known around these particular policy measures, said, in a Victorian parliamentary inquiry, vaping isn't tobacco, and she was actually right for once.
Well, vaping products don't contain tobacco.
Big tobacco killed my grandparents. I don't want to see another person die from big tobacco. None of us do. So we found a pathway off cigarettes. Firstly, let me acknowledge that there are hundreds of thousands of Australians across this great wide open land of ours, from Tennant Creek down to the back blocks of Mackay to Echuca, Tasmania and further. Hundreds of thousands of us have found a pathway off smoking, only to have a system at the moment that appears to really encourage vapors to return to cigarettes. And I'll explain a little bit further as I go here today. Look, firstly, let me touch on my quit story very quickly. I've been smoke-free for about 9 years, thanks to vaping. I went to my doctor, and my doctor said, look, Pippa, if you do not quit smoking, I can't give you this life-dependent medication anymore. So there was a new medication I required to help keep me alive. Unfortunately, there was a clash with that medication that meant if I had kept on smoking, the likelihood of me dying from a stroke or dying prematurely from a stroke or a massive blood clot was massive. Absolutely massive. Sure, there is that risk when you're smoking anyway, but along with this medication would have been absolutely massive. So I had a choice. I had to have a life. I had to have this life important medication and found a pathway to quit. Thankfully, I found vaping just at the right time. I was able to go back to my doctor and let her know that I've found a pathway of smoking with vaping. She didn't know much about vaping at that particular stage, but she did her research. And the great news was her partner, who had been smoking for over 30 years as well, had also had her research passed on to her, and she was able to quit smoking in the same year that I did, which was great news because they were able to run marathons together, which I think is just an absolute showcase of the power of being able to share the proper information. So let me say that I don't say that vaping is risk-free. We know that there are some small risks, but again, I'll get into that as we go. Look, what do we do with at the Alive movement? We are those vapors who are basically being referred to as snowflakes and worse. We're the ones who have had enough of the propaganda and the misinformation and misleading information that seems to be running through a lot of government channels. We've had enough. We've got together as individual advocates under the same banner to create a movement, and a movement we are creating. We have so far already, since May last year, we've coordinated and collaborated to organise the biggest adult vaping survey that at least I know of vapors, of adult vapors, let's be clear, in Australia. That's over 96% of all daily vapors are adults. Let's be clear about that. We're not going to be thrown under the bus anymore, guys. We are actually recording data, information of every word said about vaping across Australia. Every cent being spent on vaping policy across Australia, we are monitoring and we are rebutting. Stay tuned to our website for more information on that. There will be living website pages which will be holding this sort of information and holding everyone from politicians to media and grand farmers to account. So, where are we at so far with all this? The sad thing is, as I alluded to before, there are too many people, returning to smoking. We have had, the government's had ample warnings about this. There's been ample inquiries about this, and look, let me just give you a couple of key quotes on some examples of what vapors have said since legislation have come in, and we've the vapor products that once were able to get to from shops like Rob just spoke about so well, they just couldn't get their hands on anymore. One person says, "I'm done with vaping. The ridiculous hoops that I have to jump through now, and what is even worse is the outright price gouging these online pharmacies are charging now. On my last vape now, then it's back to the rollies for me," says a disgusted 56-year-old. I'll skip one for the sake of time. This is one of the saddest ones. "I'm smoking again after I quit with a vape for over 6 years. My COPD is getting bad from the smokes, but any vapes you can find are super expensive. It's ridiculous." And he's referring to the pharmacy vapes. The vapes that are limited in flavours and price through this ridiculous pharmacy-only model. Look, we see all sorts of statistics here at Alive. We see the wastewater nicotine reports, and they indicate that the smoking rate declines may not be as great as what is currently being reported. And I know that's a controversial thing to say. Look at the wastewater reports. There isn't much nicotine being wasted out of these illegal disposable vapes. It's the cigarettes from the cigarette butts that leach into the drains that they pick up. When people have a disposable vape, they vape it, they're done. Look, the other sad thing is, got a report, is that Butler even said himself just a few days ago that half or 50% of over 30s that were vaping are no longer vaping. Sadly, I know from the survey that I just spoke about earlier, we know that chances are well over 90% of them would have returned to smoking. And with that, we are also seeing another recent figure coming out stating that 66 people are dying from smoking-related illness every day. Guys, that was about 60 only a couple of years ago, and in the 50s a couple of years before that. The death rate from smoking is escalating. We have a problem here. Let's put this in perspective. If you can imagine the biggest packed MCG crowd down there in Victoria on grand final day or on Boxing Day test, every 4 years there's someone dying from smoking. Do you think we need to have a look at some sensible measures around tobacco harm reduction and listen to consumers? Because we're sick of being ignored. We've been ignored for way too long. We've had laws made about us that aren't about us. And we say nothing about us without us. How many people have died from vaping? Scientifically, I mean. Let's get it down to nicotine vaping. I'll give you a little hint. Donuts. Zip, zero, zilch. We see the public waste of taxpayers' money of well over $1 billion spent on misleading people about vaping. Let me give you a couple of examples. We see silly ads saying that, oh, you could be vaping things like weed killer. Now let me tell you, I've put my e-liquid on the weeds outside and they are not dying. They say there's things like insect killer in vapes. I've tried pouring e-liquids, as stupid as that sounds, on Louis the Fly, just laughed at me and flew away. Because it's not true, because it's an exaggeration. Again, it's about the dose making the poison. And there's exaggerations about formaldehyde. Everybody has a hint of formaldehyde in their mouth. People wouldn't eat an apple. People would not eat an apple if they knew there was cyanide in an apple. What? And this is the type of egg I make. Of course, in an apple it's just a micro trace, but it gives you an example of the type of ridiculous exaggerations and misleading information that is being handed out to the public, and even worse is scaring smokers from wanting to find a way to get off the smokes where vaping may have been a useful tool. In fact, it's the most popular quit method in the world. It is the most effective quit method in the world. Don't trust me, trust the science. I've got it all on the website. Trust the gold standard, Cochrane, the Cochrane Review. Look, we the consumers, we've written to public inquiries, politicians' offices, the media and more, and warned of this inevitable black market. Yet we are ignored or often referred to as big tobacco lobbyists. We are sick of the prohibition and its effects, and there will be many who will be watching this and saying, vaping isn't prohibited. You can go to a chemist in 5 out of 7 states, and in the other 2 states go and get a doctor's prescription and get 1 of 3 flavours on an overpriced vaping product. Sure, they might say that, but let me tell you, it is prohibition. Let me make this point very clear. The great Winston Churchill, during the early 1900s, alcohol prohibition in the US, when he was travelling over there, yes, he too had to get a prescription before he could get his alcohol. We see the 220, actually there was one just come through in the last day or so, probably 221 fire bombings that have been caused not only by illicit tobacco. Vaping is the other half of the story, guys. These shops are basically half illicit tobacco, half illicit vape sales. Let's not forget that. We see the innocent life that was lost due to this criminal market. We see young children being affected by smoke inhalation in their beds as they are being firebombed from a store right below. We see the businesses, childcare centres, educational spaces, as well as community hubs affected by tobacco and turf wars. We see the sickening effects of bad policy, which is costing small businesses their livelihoods. Many small businesses can't even get insurance. The current government have already lost 27,000 jobs under their government. What? We'll just blow a few more up to exacerbate another problem, as we've already seen across Australia, and they can't even get insurance, devalue adjacent properties and worse. We see that legal vape shops, like Rob was explaining that he had earlier, have been legislated out of business, causing the very people who helped us, the nicotine, the safer nicotine consumers, they helped us quit smoking. And then we've got to see them go to the wall, many bankrupt. Thousands of jobs have been lost. No compensation from the federal government whatsoever, not a cent. Thousands of jobs lost. Hundreds of businesses, good, previously legal businesses, prior to July 2024, sent out of business, governed or legislated out of business. We have been stigmatised as consumers. We've been stigmatised and ridiculed by others on the back of misleading public health campaigns that I referred to earlier. This has all gone way too far. The prohibitionist policies that were allegedly put in place to protect the youth are clearly failing. The levels of enforcement of illicit tobacco and vape outlets are never going to be adequate, as this is always going to be an ongoing game of whack-a-mole. We've already seen in the last few days Mark Butler announcing another further 160 odd million on enforcement. What are we going to do? Wait till another $6 billion or so gets wiped off taxpayers' hard-earned money, while there are people who can't even afford to live or get an accommodation. And the cost of living crisis, it's absurd. We were told that the prohibitive laws on vapes were to protect the youth. Yet I can show you how publicly funded campaigns were shown in schools 3 years ago that taught kids how to vape and where to buy them.
Compared to conventional cigarettes, they are cheaper and easier to hide.
Where would youths get the idea of how and where to get vapes?
However, the majority of teenagers are buying the nicotine vapes via Facebook through dealers who purchase products from overseas to resell them here in Australia.
3 years ago, your Australian government paid to teach your youths just that.
There are actually 2 types of vapes, disposable for about $10 to $15 and refillable.
With video education programs like this, more teens vaped.
One capsule, depending on usage, can last between 2 to 4 days, making it a much more cost-effective option to regular cigarettes. But there are known tobacco retailers that will sell the nicotine versions under the table with a wink and a nod.
Now they blame ordinary mums and dads who wish to be smoke-free. Enough of the lies, Mark Butler and Anthony Albanese. It's time to apologise to adults and legalise vaping sensibly.
Ridiculous. We, the adult consumers, are the major stakeholders and sick of not being heard and being disregarded. We even went to Mark Butler's office recently to present him with a fire extinguisher and a fire blanket, and still we had no reply to the letter we posted him that respectfully outlined the flaws to his vaping policies. Look, what do we, the consumers, need? What's our policy? What do we need? Look, it's based around three key pillars. We need access. We need access to the tobacco harm reduction products that are going to help us quit smoking, like vaping, snus, heat not burn, pouches, etc. We need the truth about these products to be told. We need results, because only when those first two pillars will happen, the third pillar will happen, which is results where real smoking rates will fall. We need to implement evidence-based regulation for vaping products to ensure they meet stringent safety and quality standards. We need to differentiate taxation policies to reflect the reduced harm of vaping compared to smoking, incentivising smokers to switch. You know, we're not incentivising people to say, yeah, you must vape if you're a smoker, saying, hey, as part of a suite of measures, of course. Ensure adult smokers have access to safer alternatives by maintaining legal, regulated retail and online channels. Introduce targeted youth prevention measures that deter underage access without limiting adult options, and more importantly, not lying to our kids about the effects of vaping as well. We don't want them going home to their parents who have found a pathway off the cigarettes, as I and hundreds of thousands of us across Australia have, and telling their parents after what they've learnt in the schoolroom that maybe that vape sounds like it's as bad or worse than smoking. That would be a tragedy. And only to have that parent return to smoking, can you only imagine? We need to launch comprehensive public education campaigns to address widespread information and build trust in harm reduction strategies. Look, we were sold by our government a vaping prohibition policies that they said were to protect the children. That 3.5% of daily experimental vapors that James talked about before. We're told that we protect these from big tobacco hooking a whole new generation. Well, the only big tobacco vapes are in chemists, ladies and gentlemen. They were never in Australia beforehand. If Mark Butler was so sure big tobacco was all behind this as some crazy conspiracy theory that apparently or appears that he may have, well, why hasn't he held big tobacco to account? Why hasn't he brought them to justice? I'm still waiting on an answer from that, Mr. Butler. The 4% of daily teen use of vapes is in rapid decline based on recent figures. That's 3.5%. While poor government policy is causing the former smoking vapors, that's 96% of the population, back onto the smokes in the hundreds of thousands. Yep, I've touched that. Look, for the health of our great nation, this must stop now. Australians are told that vapes are a big tobacco ploy, yet big tobacco vapes are the main vapes that are being sold by chemists, as I just touched on. Vaping was created because by Heinrich, who basically brought it to its popularity, if you like, 20 years ago. Keep in mind, in that time, not one death from vaping. It was created and popularised because no big tobacco or no big pharma company could or would. Very important thing to consider. Big tobacco may have got onto the back of vapes only once things got a little bit more popularised because they wanted a slice of the pie. Not necessarily a bad thing, is it? That they want to sell a harm reduction product instead of one that kills 2 out of every 3 people. So look, policy on vaping products needs to be based on evidence, not exaggerations, misleading claims, or ideology. The evidence. The evidence is clear. The harms from smoking come from the smoke and the tar, not the nicotine. Vaping contains less than 1% of the carcinogenic material compared to smoking. Less than 1%. and is at least 95% less harmful than smoking. As the head of the Cancer Council recently said in a federal inquiry, the head of the Cancer Council, Tony Buchanan, there is no good evidence that vaping causes cancer.
What I said was there is no evidence at the moment that we can say that vaping causes cancer.
And as I said before, as Becky Freeman said, vaping is not tobacco. We are the vaping consumers of Australia. We don't want to smoke. We don't want anyone to get hurt through foolish laws as they are now. We want to remain smoke-free so we can enjoy another day with a loved one, because that is what it's all about at the end of the day. Don't we, as Australians, deserve to have another day with a loved one with sensible laws? Look, that's why we say let's work together to develop informed, balanced policies and prioritise public health over ideology. Australia, now is that time. Australia, let's improve vaping education. Thank you.
I think you mentioned some of this before, Pippa, but maybe if you could just highlight from the perspective of the vaping community, what are maybe three of the key things that you would like to see in vaping policy that you think would make it attractive for vapers to participate in a legal market and sort of undermine all this organised crime and smuggling that's happening at the moment?
Sure. The first couple of points I make are sort of joined together. Firstly, we need respectable, risk-proportionate policy that allows the retail vaping market to exist legally, for a start. Let's get it out of the hands of criminals. We need a legal vaping market. We had a good one that was destroyed and replaced by a criminal one already. That's a massive mistake that's happened under this government. David Littleproud, the head of the National Party, has already admitted we got it wrong. We need the Labor government to do the same. But we not only, as vapers, expect or the inevitable, as Alex has alluded to, what will inevitably happen, which is legalising and regulating vapes. We need reasonable and reasonable regulations that the industry had been calling on for years before all these bans, for quality products and safety assurance measures on vaping products to keep the rubbish vapes out. You know, we don't want the cheap Chinese, horrible, untested, unregulated vapes. We want to get them out of the market. So there's sort of 2 points rolled into one. But before we can even get there, this government, the Labor government now, under Mark Butler and Anthony Albanese, they need to be man enough, as David Littleproud already has, to stand up and say, we have got it wrong. We are going to have to re-educate Australia about tobacco harm reduction and the realities of what is. We need to stop the misleading, the exaggerations. As vapers, as consumers, we just want another day with a loved one. I mean, surely that's not too much to ask.
Thanks, Pippa.
Yeah, there was something I want to get on the back of what Mara always said, which I think is a really important point, particularly from the consumer point of view. As vapers, as smokers in Australia, no, we don't want to be told what to do. But we aren't unwilling to go and get some help to quit smoking. But you're right, through that regulated retail environment where you're invited to talk to somebody who has experienced vaping before, has become smoke-free themselves, has been a very integral part of many, hundreds of thousands of Australians who have found a pathway of smoking with vaping. But here's where I've got some questions, big open questions for those who are viewing this today. Just before the Butler government came in, the quit line, which we're all told to call and they're going to help us quit smoking and they've all got the best quit methods, not only, and subject to me being corrected, had not released any KPIs, any figures, engagement figures for who and how many people they've contacted or been in contact with and helped measure effectiveness of quitting in this country, hasn't been released. We need those figures. I think that is damn important. I'll tell you why it's important. Because I mentioned at the beginning of the new Albanese government, not far in, all of a sudden the quit line had more money than it ever had before. We need to know that we are getting results, our bang for our buck with our public health system, to know that they're being effective. They do not want to listen. If you rang the quit line 2 years ago and you wanted to quit vaping, they didn't want to talk to you. All of a sudden, all this extra money seems to be thrown into the quit line, and all of a sudden they're interested in helping everybody quit vaping. So, some big open questions there. We don't want to be spoken down to. We want to be acknowledged respectfully. Let's listen to what the likes of Mara have said about their experience in New Zealand, and understand that they just might actually know a little bit better. The proof is in the pudding.
Can I just add something on the quit line? So in New Zealand, they did have a KPI. They were supposed to help 100,000 people stop smoking. And when it was evaluated, they struggled and they only got to 50,000. So it was shut down, and it was given to just a general health call center. So I think there's major flaws, theoretical flaws, underpinning smoking cessation services, at least in New Zealand. You know, in the UK, you've got a couple of areas where they're doing a great job. They've got the vape to swap, you know, so was it swap? Anyway, they're giving out free vape kits, and I see they're just claiming like a 24% quit rate or switch rate at 4 weeks. So there's some good models in the UK, but cessation has been theoretically flawed for quite some time.
It's time to listen to real science, and that's that.
Vaping products or
vaping products. Well, vaping products don't contain tobacco. Well, vaping products don't contain tobacco.
We are the vapors of Australia, and we're done with the propaganda. We're done with the lies that are spreading, and we know which way this heading. We know the government